patient. So curiosity. I remember Dr. Deming saying that new knowledge comes from outside and by invitation. And so during my career, I tried to look for invitations. And when my boss sent out an email telling people to do something that I thought was pretty stupid, I sent him a note and said, "That's a bad idea. You shouldn't do that. Withdraw that." And then he sent me a note and said, "Well, if you're so smart, what would you do?" I took that as an invitation, went down to his office and figured if I knock on his door and say, "You willing to talk?" then it's an invitation. If I knock on his door and he says, "Get the hell out of here," it's not. Well, he said, "I'm willing to talk." So we talked for a while, came to a conclusion. And then I remember teaching school, high school for a long time, 8 years, and math and English. And the interesting thing about that was the people that were there had not invited me. And I found out my job was not to help people learn, it was to deliver curriculum. And when you're delivering curriculum to somebody who hasn't invited you, the likelihood of success is pretty close to zero, which is only one of the problems in the school system. So Dr. Deming was known first, initially got a lot of attention in 1982 when he released Out of the Crisis. And in Out of the Crisis, he got famous for the 14 points. And the people trying to implement the 14 points, he called them obligations of management. And it was fascinating to watch people who thought they were going to work on Deming-like stuff because it sort of in the time that was something you should be trying to do. And so they pick and choose which of the 14 points they thought were useful, and they try to implement those, not recognizing that it's not, you're obligated to do 3 of these 14 things, any 3 you want. It's you got to do those 14 things. And then in 1990, I guess, when he wrote The New Economics, he codified the theory that results in the 14 points. He calls it a system of profound knowledge. And he says, if you apply the system of profound knowledge to the task of transforming an organization, the 14 points will follow naturally. What that also means is that a system of profound knowledge can be applied to a whole bunch of other stuff. And we'll talk about that because it's very valuable. It's particularly valuable when you apply it to an organization. And I found out over the years, we have sessions several times a year on, we read the New Economics and discuss it. What I found out over the years, so 20 or plus years of doing this, that we all work for the same organization, whether we're in government, whether we're in education, or whether we're in industry, whether we're in healthcare. The mental model for running all of those organizations is identical. It's identical and not as useful as it maybe was before. Deming used to complain about how schools of business were teaching people about what we did in the past to run companies so that they could go out and run companies in the future, which is problematic. We were earnestly and eagerly and dedicated to making sure they understood the past that they're not going to face and didn't give them anything to help them understand the future they are going to face. And organizations have been trapped for years in a mental model. We're always trapped in a mental model, but you can open your mind to other operations. And one of them is a system of profound knowledge, which we'll get into more. I'm pushing buttons, but I'm not sure what button. Oh, that made noise. Did it change a slide? Doesn't look like it.
You might be better off with this more button.
Hit the arrow. Just hit the arrow.
Oh, that guy.
That's not working usually.
Really, that's one slide.
Too much technology.
Okay, there.
Ah,
Now,
there is no substitute for knowledge, Dr. Deming says. And knowledge is different from data and information. He used to say you can get, and he's talking in the 1990s, so 30 years ago. 30 years ago, he said you can get all kinds of data and information instantaneously. And it doesn't give you any knowledge. We probably can get 10 times as much now, and it still doesn't give you any knowledge. So here are the elements of the system of profound knowledge. I'll talk about them briefly. We'll get in more depth of this as it goes on. But it's 4 elements, and they're interdependent, meaning what happens in one place affects what happens in other places. It's like what your lungs and your muscles and your brain do depends on each other. Your lungs, when your lungs are responding to you running around the block, they act one way. And the lungs will then limit at times how well you can run around the block. There's an interaction there. And the interaction is a special interaction. It's an interdependent. What happens in one place affects what happens everywhere else. So in this diagram that we see, those 4 elements, if you're looking at the world, trying to look at the understanding of variation, understanding variation is incomplete if you don't understand psychology, a theory of knowledge, and have appreciation for a system. So studying them alone isn't successful. You have to understand how they interact with each other and apply them in that way. And psychology is a huge part. I don't know if you've noticed, but almost every organization is run by people. And as long as you have people, there is psychology. And understanding what Deming reminds us is there's a psychology of the individual, there's a psychology of groups, there's a psychology of change, all of which you need to understand if you're going to help people do the things they probably want to do, don't know how to do, and you may not have a way of, you may never have had a way of helping them do it. I know I was very surprised when I got out of the school system that I thought was majorly flawed and very, very expensive. They weren't very thrifty with how and very efficient. And I moved into to a technical area where they were building the Clinch River breeder reactor parts, among other things. And in this technical area, I was surprised at how inefficient they were. And I said, well, for a school district, they're not trying to make money. That's okay. But I would expect a company that is trying to make a profit to be way more efficient than they were. They were as chaotic as any school system I'd ever been involved in. So I found that very intriguing. And it helped me figure out that I didn't understand, because I hadn't been introduced to Dr. Deming. I didn't understand what was wrong, but I knew things were wrong. I said, both in the school system and there. I remember when I was teaching school, I was working in Fullerton, California. I don't know, 80 miles away from here, wherever it is. And I read a newspaper article before my introduction to Deming, but back when we had newspapers. And I was reading the article, and the Fullerton Hospital had sent a family home with the wrong baby. Oops. So a couple of days went by, maybe 3, I don't know. And they figured it out and they corrected it. And the newspaper article is saying that the hospital then went in and looked at its policies and changed the rules and regulations and the methodology for getting babies home with the right parents, with a promise that this would never happen again. And that was fine. But the last part of the article says, and they fired 3 nurses. So my brain's saying, wait a minute, you just said you fixed all the procedures. Those procedures that they used that created the problem, you gave them. What do you fire them for? You know it's wrong because you fixed it. And I couldn't explain what was wrong, but I knew it was wrong. And then when I got introduced, one of the things Deming did for me is help me be able to explain to others what's wrong and, more importantly, what you can do instead. I could always point out what was wrong. I couldn't always tell you what to do differently. I just knew that wasn't the thing to be doing. So we'll get into more of each of these. So here's one that has bits of variation associated with it, plus psychology. Here's a plot of some data. This is the performance of some process. Might be a complicated process, might be a simple process, but that's the output. And you'll notice the line in the middle is the average of those data points. And the two lines on the outside are 3 standard deviations. It's the predictable range of variation you're going to get from this. And notice somebody has decided the goal is up there. Now, when you establish a goal that's beyond the capability of the process you gave people to do it, one of 3 things is going to happen. They're either going to change and improve the system so they get better results, or they're going to distort the system in some way to get better results, or more commonly, they distort the data. They lie. So you get the wrong data. So now you're basing everything on the wrong data. The psychology behind giving people a goal that the system you gave them can't achieve, that's very demeaning. And when you do it, bad things happen. 2 of the 3 are bad: distort the system or distort the data. Sears found out years ago. Some of you will remember when Sears had an auto department that fixed cars, kind of like Costco does now. And that was going very well, but somebody in management decided they needed to make more money, so put goals on each of the Sears outfits to get a certain number of dollars in the door. And over time, not very long time, the people doing the work figured out they can't get that much stuff through the auto place. So they were never going to meet the goal. So what they started doing is when cars came in with nothing wrong with them, they'd break something so they'd have something to fix. And that went on for a while, and eventually it hit the newspaper. Somebody figured it out, kind of threw Sears out of the automotive business. But Deming talks about a person behaving rationally given his perception of the situation. So you've got all these people doing work. They're afraid they're going to lose their jobs if they don't get enough business in. And the way to get business in case you can't just do what the car owner needs doing, you have to do more. You have to break things. Perfectly rational. I got to feed my family. The way I'm going to feed my family is make sure we have enough work. You can complain about that, but the problem isn't with the worker. The problem is with the management who says, here's your way of doing business, and here's the result you have to achieve. And no way of doing business like this is going to achieve that result. So you have to quit or you have to cheat. Not a good situation. And there's a difference between a goal and a purpose. We seem to think that when we give somebody a goal, that gives them purpose. Doesn't give them purpose, it gives them a goal. Purpose is a whole different thing. A company, an organization needs a purpose. Why are we here? What's the point? What are we all trying to accomplish together? And in an organization, everybody in the organization has to understand the purpose and understand how he or she fits in to helping achieve that purpose. If the people can't see how they fit in to help achieve that purpose, it's going to be hard for them to be able to achieve it because they don't know what it is. And so what people do is they come up with their personal purpose and they work on that thinking, I hope this helps the company because I'm not sure what I'm supposed to be doing exactly. I know my job, but I don't know how that helps anybody. And without understanding purpose, people can't do a good job. Deming used to use an example. said, let's check, see how well you guys do with this. What does it take to clean a table? What things do I need to clean a table?
Depends on the table.
Depends on what you use it for.
Depends on the purpose.
Some should use it for.
It depends on the purpose. Everything starts with purpose. If the purpose is to play cards on it, you wash it one way. If the purpose is to perform surgery on it, that's a whole different thing. And if you don't know the purpose of your task, you can't possibly do a good job. And if you don't know the purpose of your organization, you're going to have trouble doing what's needed in order to help that organization get better. And one of the things when you're talking about a system, like a soccer team or a baseball team or any other team, one of the obligations of a member of a team is to help the other members do better. You can see it in baseball. Those of you who don't know baseball, I'll give you a football example. But in baseball, you purposely make an out to get a runner to go from first base to second base. Purpose, you make an out. That's outs are bad. You're not supposed to make outs. You're supposed to get hits. But you purposely do that. In soccer, football, for most of you, what happens is a player will start toward the center of the field and make a run toward the corner flag. Just run, and he's not expecting somebody to pass him the ball. He's making that run so the defender that's in that area goes that way, and it creates a space behind him that a teammate can step into. They do a whole bunch of their running that has nothing to do with getting the ball. That's why they're all worn out, because they're moving around all the time, running, and it looks like no purpose. It is a purpose. It's to make the defense holes show up. You can see the same thing in basketball. You see him running around, passing the ball really fast till they get it to the other guy over here who's all alone. Then he gets a shot. So your job as a member of an organization is to help the others contribute as well as you to the purpose of the organization. Now, the downfall is most organizations aren't very good with purpose. Somebody I reported to at NASA, when I talked about purpose, got the bright idea that was a good thing. So she wanted to send around a note to everybody saying, you need to write down the purpose of your job. I was going to send it out to everybody. And I said, don't do that yet. And she said, why not? And I said, until you know the purpose of NASA and can explain it to all these folks, there's no way they're going to know what their purpose is. They'll make something up and send it to you, but how would they know what their purpose is if the organization doesn't have a purpose and nobody's told them how they fit in? Doesn't happen very often. Does at Peaker and a few other places. Where's Dick? It happens at Peaker. Let's see, what else have I got? Talking about systems, one of the things that Don Wheeler said, and I think he got it from Brian Joyner, he said, a bad system will defeat a good person every time. And Deming talks about the problems that are generated in organizations. 94% of them come from the system. They're inherent in how you're doing business. And 6% of them come from outside of that. And he used to say 80-20, but he changed it to 94-6. And somebody once asked, where'd you get that data? He made it up. He's just trying to give you the point that a whole bunch of what happens has nothing to do with the people doing the work and everything to do with the system you gave them to do the work. And until you can understand the difference, which ones are system caused and which ones are different from being system caused, you're going to have trouble making things better, and you're not going to have very happy people.
I check something here. Testing 1, 2. But it still works. Sorry.
Okay. When you look at a system, there's something that, especially in the Western world and super especially in the US, there's a belief that what drives things to improvement is competition. It's an interesting perception, and not that competition can't be useful, but if you take a look at an economy and you take a look at what goes on, let's go back to when the railroads first came to the US. They started building railroads. They had like 3 railroads. Can you imagine what would have happened if each of the railroads built its own tracks with cars that hooked together in their own distinct way, and they set that up, and that would mean you'd have to have 3 different kinds of tracks and 3 different kinds of car hookups in order to get goods to travel around. Otherwise, if you shipped them on your track and then you got to a spot that somebody else's track took over, you have to unload everything, unload it, load it, reload it on the new one and ship it out. How slow did the economy go then? But those railroads got together and cooperated. They cooperated on a common problem. We all want to make money, so they agreed on a standard. Rails are going to be this far apart. This is how the hooking and braking system is going to work, and everybody's going to do it that way. That spread the economy way faster than anything else they could have done. And we don't recognize, because we're so convinced that competition is what drives things. When we look around, we see competition everywhere. But if your mental model is, where's the cooperation? You're going to find all kinds of places where cooperation is what's driving the economy. And in fact, I played a lot of soccer in my time. If you have teammates of your 11 guys running around in the field competing with each other, you're not going to do very well. Your job is to help make other people better at achieving the purpose of the system, of the team. And that is missing in almost every organization, unfortunately. I keep forgetting. Am I gonna? There we go. By what method? We talk about the results of something when we're looking at. The results come from having done something and using a method to do it. And the interesting thing is, when we talk about goals, you can establish a goal, but if you haven't created a method that's going to achieve that goal, it's not going to be useful. Deming used to ask all the time, by what method? By what method? And only the method is important, not the goal, because the goal doesn't create results. The results come from the method. So if you're not achieving the goal, it's a method problem, and you need to look at that. And I discovered the method of learning that we all have. I didn't recognize it even when I was teaching school. I didn't conceive of what does it take for us to learn. And I was watching, after being introduced to Dr. Deming, I was watching Brendan, my son, who at the time was 8 or 10 years old, and he was attempting to learn to do skateboard tricks, which it's kind of painful sometimes, but I was watching what was going on in his head. And what's going on in his head, I can see it. He's got this idea, this concept of what trick he wants to make. And then in his head, he says, well, I'm going to test a method. And he'll do something and then maybe do it 2 or 3 times and it'll work for him and he's happy, or he'll do it once and fall down, do it twice and fall down and say, this method ain't going to work, and he'll change his method. And you look at that, and that's a learning activity. We have to have an idea of what we want in the first place. And with that idea, then we have to develop a method that's going to get us that. And then we have to test the method. And to test it, you have to get feedback, and Brendan was getting feedback frequently, some of it painful, but it was definitely feedback. So in order to learn, you have to have a theory, and you have to have a method, and then you have to test the experience, the reality with your theory. So without a theory, you can't learn anything. Dr. Deming talked about the fact that without a theory, you don't even know what data to collect to help you learn. What's the point you're trying to learn? What is the purpose in you learning? That will help you figure out what you need to do. But the loop that you go through is very much what Deming calls the plan, do, study, act cycle. And I was interested when I first saw that. I said, wow, that makes so much sense. And then, while looking at that and thinking about it, I was intrigued by the fact that almost the title of the chart when I saw it in the book was clear, but I had been using it in the total quality management office, and we were using it to help teams get better at what they do. And we helped teams in a way that isn't very useful for the system. We're supposed to make sure every team and company had a project to do where they would need to use this plan, do, study, act cycle, which means you're trying to improve the pieces of a system in order to improve the system. Improving the pieces doesn't necessarily improve the system and frequently destroys it. The system has interdependencies. So when you take each piece and work on it separately and make each of those pieces better, it doesn't necessarily make the system better. It might destroy it. And the company I worked for, they had a product they made that was made from a disc, and there were blades that went around it that had to be welded in place. And there was enough variation in the diameters of the discs and the width of the blades that they had a specification that said you got to use 50 plus or minus 2 blades. So I bet those performed differently, but that's a whole nother issue. They had that going on. And then there was an improvement process going on. So the blade guys went out and did a great job, probably spent a bunch of money, and changed the variation in their blade thickness widths. So nearly every blade was identical. Brilliant gain. They probably got an award for it. It's an improvement. When the first lot of blades went down to the shop floor for them to build the part, they put the disc on there, and their method used to be you stack these blades around before you weld them to see that there are no gaps and no overlaps. And what they had been doing for years is stacking them, and when they had a gap or an overlap, changing blades out and bringing in these other blades. And because there was variation in those blades, they could get no gaps and no overlaps. As soon as they got all the blades exactly the same width, the variation in the wheel took over, and they shut down the shop. The improvement in the blades shut down the shop. You can't improve a system by improving the parts taken individually. That is such a hard concept. How do we improve individuals in an organization? We improve individuals in organizations by having performance reviews and handing out awards and all that kind of stuff. And even if that were a good way to improve the results of each individual, you're in danger of that improvement being a blade improvement that screws up everything else. Systems need to be changed by understanding what's in the system and then coming up with a theory for what you can do to get better or different results, and then testing it. That's very different from trying to improve the system by improving the individuals in the organization. It gets back to figuring out what your method's going to be and then testing it. So everything starts with purpose. You probably have a purpose in being here. Hope the purpose is to learn. Deming used to say to learn, to have fun, and make a difference. So we talked a little bit about goals and task performance and how ridiculous it is to give somebody a goal that their task is going to be unable, their method is going to be unable to make it happen. I'm going to check it.
Get back to where you were.
No, well, especially if you figure out that time.
Oh. We could have you go back, but all day.
I'm aground.
The keyboard is where you were touching on, just the problem.
Yeah.
The outer part is.
So we're going to try an exercise here. We're going to try have you choose a theory. Then we're going to look at how we might prove or disprove that theory and what the results are. So here I've got 3 theories, and I want you to choose one. And if your brain can't hang on to it for a few minutes, then write it down so you know whether it was A, B, or C. So you'll remember what your theory was. This is about contingency rewards. Contingency means if you do this, I will give you this reward. Getting the reward is contingent upon doing this. So past performance, we're going to look at this. A says the theory is contingency rewards enhance task performance. Theory B is contingency rewards do not affect task performance. C is contingency rewards make task performance worse. By the way, I can't think of any other theories, so those are the 3. So now choose your theory. Now we're going to do a test. Experiment number 1 is going to try to test this. We're going to take pairs of nearly identical images that are going to be flashed on a screen. 72 9-year-olds will participate in the experiment. One at a time, each boy will be brought into the laboratory and challenged to tell the 2 faces apart. Some boys will be paid when they succeed. Others will simply be told each time whether or not they are correct. The payments range from 1 cent to 50 cents. So based on that test, do you believe that's a valid challenge of the 3 theories? Is that a useful way to maybe make some conclusions? So based on this test and the theory you chose, what do you think is going to happen? Predict regarding whether the paid or unpaid boys will do better. But just in case, we're going to have another test. Can't have too many tests. Using 128 undergraduates will be brought into a room, into a lab individually and given matches and thumbtacks and boxes that the tacks came in and told to mount a candle on the wall using only these materials. They're supposed to figure out that an empty box can be tacked to the wall and the candle placed in the top of it. Some of the students will be given empty boxes with matches and tacks on the side, and others will get full boxes, which makes the solution less obvious. Some of the students will be informed they can earn anywhere from $4 to $20 if they succeed. Others won't be promised anything. So based on your theory, predict the results of this experiment. Will the rewarded group do better or worse than the unrewarded group? I like triplets, so here we are. We're going to ask undergraduates to select a pattern on each page that is least like the other 2 patterns on that page. Some students are going to be offered money for correct answers, some will not. A follow-on experiment in which the amount of money will be doubled for right answers will also be conducted. So based on that experiment, predict what you think the outcome is going to be, whether the rewarded folks are going to do better or worse than the unrewarded folks. The results. In each of the experiments, the rewarded groups performed worse than the unrewarded groups. And they did additional experiments with more difficult tasks. And the more difficult the task was, the more the reward interfered with their performance. In one experiment, those promised a reward took more than twice as long to solve the problem. Now, what's intriguing about that is these are not recent results. And what you ought to examine is, did your predicted outcomes come about? And if not, then maybe something's wrong with your theory. So you're asking, how well does the result fit my theory? And what have I learned about my theory? And if the theory turns out to be wrong, you keep using it until it doesn't work, then you change it. We used a theory Newton had, although in Newton's days he called them laws. Very, very deterministic situation. He called them laws. And nowadays we're smarter and we call the things theories, because Newton had theories, but it turns out his theories don't fit what we now know how the universe works. The universe isn't deterministic. It's uncertain. It's very probabilistic. So your theory you use until it becomes not useful, and then you need to change it. How long does a theory last? Newton's lasted about 300 years, so sometimes a long time. These results and these experiments were run, look at the years, 1961, 62, 70, and 71. How long have we known this? And yet, what's the first thing we want to do when we have a soccer team and they win a game? Yeah, we want to award somebody most valuable player. I played soccer and I cannot believe on an 11-player team, no matter what you do to measure what's going on, how you can decide who's most valuable. It makes no sense. And nowadays, they even do another thing that's crazy in the sports, especially basketball games. I love the NBA. Scores are, 110 to 109. So those teams are different, 110, 109. You got to be kidding me, but let that be. What happens is it's 108 to 109, and somebody takes a shot at the end of the game as the buzzer runs out, boom, into the basket, they win. And what are we told? Even though the score was 111 to 110, they say that guy scored the winning basket. It's not a winning basket by itself. There were a heck of a lot of other baskets. How can that be the winning basket? Yes, it's crazy to think about most valuable players and winning goals and winning baskets. The team scored the goal. When the score's 1-0 in a soccer match, I know the winning goal. When the score's 3-2, I don't have a clue. Which one of the 3 goals is the winning one? Doesn't make any sense. It's the wrong question. But we're always looking for that. We're always looking to hand out awards to the best. And the biggest trouble I have with awards, and it's not sour grapes. In college, I was the most valuable player in soccer, my college team. So it's not sour grapes. When you believe in heroes for these team events, whether it's an organization or a team on a soccer field, when you have heroes, that means you believe there are scapegoats. If we lost, it's somebody's fault. And holy cow, do we want to point that out. In fact, announcers after all these World Cup games afterwards are really pointing out all the screw-ups they see everywhere. They say, well, there were screw-ups, that's for sure, because we're people, so that's going to happen. But it's not about the individual screw-ups. It's about team performance. It's a whole different viewpoint. Here's Deming's chart that he put on the on the bulletin board in 1950 in Japan. It's called Production Viewed as a System. And he said it was on the board every time he gave a class. And he said, what helped the Japanese turn around from a country that couldn't produce anything that was of much quality into one that was starting to bury Detroit, what turned them around was an understanding of this diagram.
You lost your microphone again. Hang on, I'm gonna try something. Don't laugh.
EDSA?
Hey, we're gonna try something. Testing what? No, it's still not working. Oh, I taped it. Now I gotta undo it. My fix didn't work.
Recovery.
Okay, there's nothing. Now there's something?
No.
No? Okay,
You've got two ways for this don't work.
yes, now we have two ways that don't work. Okay, I can give you back a non-working microphone. That's no problem.
Sure.
Okay.
So this looks like a pretty simple diagram. Well, let's go through it. In the upper right, you see stage zero. Stage zero is where you invent the thing that you might want to try to sell. And then it moves into the design and redesign phase. And then you see it moves to different places, but it goes over to receiving the materials that you need. Then you've got suppliers A, B, C, and D who you bring material in from. The material comes in and you're going to test processes and material and machines and methods. You're going to produce things, assemble things, inspect things. You're going to distribute things. And they're going to go to customers. You're going to do some consumer research, and it might lead you back into a design or a redesign and back through the system. Now that seems like a simple diagram. How could that have made the Japanese such a simple? Everybody understands that. Let's take a look at how well we understand this simple diagram. Let's start over here. You guys can be stage zero. Okay, you guys back there, you guys can be design and redesign. And then you guys can be suppliers. And over here, you guys can be production. You guys can be assembly. You guys can be inspection. And you guys will be testing the processes and machines and costs. So everybody knows where you are in the flow chart, right?
Any customer?
Sure. Now, if I point to production, and I ask everybody who's downstream of production to raise his hand. Well, we sort of understand it, kind of. No matter where I point on that chart, everybody's downstream of everybody else. It's a system. It's interdependent. What goes on in one place is affected by what goes on in another. That simple thing is so hard to get into your head to grasp. What's unusual is for us, when a problem shows up in production, we send out a team to do what? Find out the root cause. And where do they think the root cause is? In production. Well, it could have been from anywhere. It's a system. Bill used to use the example, when you go to production, because that's where you think you see the problem, that's like taking your pulse at your wrist and say, my gosh, my pulse is 200. And then saying, what the hell's the matter with my wrist? It's a system. That's the symptom. The problem is the symptom. It may have come from anywhere in the system, not the location where it materializes. And for some reason, we're not very good at that. And root cause is one of the things. I was in charge of root cause analysis for, I don't know, 10 years, and during those 10 years, and it took me 10 years and I didn't get everybody, but I got most of them, to figure out that there's no such thing as a root cause. It doesn't make any sense. What does it take to have a fire? Oxygen, an ignition source, and fuel. What's the root?
All of the above.
The question makes no sense, but we spend a bunch of time doing that. We should give that up. Root cause is a myth and not particularly helpful. Yeah, it's singular. Take a look at a plant. Even a carrot has more than one root. All the plants have multiple roots. I when I was working for Rocketdyne and in charge of cause and corrective action, so NASA folks from quality were visiting, and I was supposed to make a presentation, and I showed them how we go through the cause analysis. And he asked, "What about root cause?" And I said, "You're talking to a person who doesn't believe in such a thing." And my executives were panicked. I just told the customer I didn't believe in something he wholeheartedly believes in. And they tried to tone it down, but I didn't back off. So here's an interesting thing talking about independence in the system. Deming has this chart, talks about a bowling team. I don't know if you know how those work. Each of 4 or 5 bowlers bowls, and they add up the scores, and that's the team activity. It's not so much interdependency there. Each person does his own bowling. An orchestra, which he shows there, like 140 people, and their jobs is to play music and not each try to be a soloist. They want to play in a way that coordinates so each of them sounds better and the orchestra as a whole sounds best. And then he says businesses are even more interdependent than that. They're even more interdependent. So interdependencies need to be recognized and dealt with. If this were your baseball team and you managed it by saying there are each of the players on the field, so when you're playing defense, you're not batting, you're playing defense. You told them they each have their own territories and they should stay in their territories and do things. Would you ever manage a baseball team like that? How about a soccer team, 11 players, and they each divide up the field and stay in your own space? How do we divide up organizations? Just like that. It makes no sense. But the vision's not there. We're used to what's been going on. We're earnestly teaching people what used to work, although I'm not sure it used to work that well, instead of teaching them what we need to do into the future. What used to work is fine. If it still works into the future, that's great. But frequently, there's no chance of it working into the future because things have changed. Deming has this diagram too, and he says the full capacity of people in a company working together and working with each other and for each other may be expressed as individuals, A, B, C, D, plus E, F, G. Then you look at all the interactions, some of which are interdependencies, but they're all interactions. If you were going to use a lever to make things better, would you be working on individuals or interactions? Just look at that. There are hundreds, if not, depending on how many people are in the organization, hundreds of thousands of interactions. So if you want to make things better, make all of those interactions better. That's a way bigger lever than working on the individuals. But we're trapped on working on individuals, finding our heroes and our scapegoats. Oops, that was backwards. So Nita Bakaitis said, here's what organizations do. Just what we showed on the baseball team. We got each of those circles says that's a department in an organization. They get funded, they get goals, all of that stuff goes around for each one of these. What are the chances that the people in production are going to spend their money to make the job of the people in the jobs of the people of assembly easier? pretty much zero, because the manager, if he spends $8,000 to do something that doesn't make any improvement, visible improvement in production, all the visible improvement is in assembly, he gets kicked in the ear, and the guy in assembly gets rewarded for the work that they did in production. It makes no sense. We have to move away from that. And it's possible if you can see it. That's part of what Deming talks about with bringing us a system of profound knowledge. It's a way to view the world so you see things you haven't seen before. You can't take action on something that you haven't thought of. And so things that help you see differently, see with different eyes, allow you to perhaps make improvements. So when we talk about systems also, there's the people who work in the system, and the bell-shaped curve is the curve of the people's performance. If you want to change that performance level, you have to change something in the system. And if you work on improving the system, you could narrow the range of variation, which might be useful. Usually less variation is better, except when you're using blades and the variation to actually make your product, but that's another story, right? So we're looking at that sort of thing, and Deming talks about the people that form that system, their performance is all within the range, the standard 3 deviations. If it's within that range, the performance is indistinguishable. Rating and ranking them is pointless. It doesn't make any sense. They're working together, they're accomplishing their goals, the system is producing that result. And yet what we're looking for all the time is the person outside needs special help, ought to go get him. That's a special cause. Needs help, well, yeah, but you might look at and see what help he needs and why. Because if he's getting different results, he's using a different method. It may be intentional, it may be accidental, but if he's doing the same thing everybody else is, he's going to get the same results. If that thing that he's doing, if the thing that he should be doing is trainable, you could train him and he'd move up and be within that family, that normal deviation. On the other hand, if you got somebody performing way outside on the high end, if you go look at what he's doing, because he's doing something different, and what he's doing is trainable, if you train everybody else, everybody will be at that level. So this is useful to understand which people need help and which people might be able to do a whole bunch more than you thought they could do and might be of value to the organization. So what you're using, Deming calls the system causes, common causes. That's the result of the system. Things outside the system are special causes, and they need action on those special causes as opposed to a change to the system. Now, here's one of my favorite charts from Deming. It's called The Destruction of Our People. He was very upset with how we did things and how rewards and recognition. He's got this chart that says life begins here. Life begins here, and then we start getting rewarded. In the early times, we're rewarded for forced distribution of grades, where we get merit systems put in place, we get increases in pay by competition. We get numerical goals without a method. We don't understand variation, and we can't see that last one very well. Oh, we reward every group, every division individually. And he's saying, so a person starts out with all his self-confidence and all his belief in himself, and over the years he gets beat down. And so he talked about not only are we wasting our resources by not understanding systems and how to manage them, we're destroying our people. which he says is definitely worse. So one is born with a natural inclination to learn. You ever seen a newborn? Boy, those first 3 or 4 years, you can't stop them from learning. Then learning a lot of things you may not want them to learn, but they're learning. You cannot stop them. But you get them into school and treat them as if they need to know this, and no matter what it is they want to know, that starts to get to them. And Deming says one inherits a right to enjoy his work. Those of you who are in the US probably remember we've got a Constitution and a Declaration of Independence. Do you remember anywhere in there where they talk about the pursuit of happiness? That's a right. And it gets denied to people in all kinds of organizations. How can you take pride and joy in your work when somebody's looking over your shoulder deciding whether you get a reward or a punishment? Or gives you a method for doing something that can't possibly achieve what he wants you to do? It's crazy. What Deming says is good management can nurture people and pull them back into a world where they can take pride in work and joy in learning. Now he talks about the system. He said what we've done in the past got us up and we started into decline. And he says, and the decline's going to continue unless we change how we do business. And to change how we do business, we need a vision that shows us other ways different from what we have done. And that's what a system of profound knowledge can do for you. Here's the Schuhart cycle. I used this for a long time in improvement. 6 years before I recognized that Deming calls it the cycle for learning and improvement. That's when I went out and watched Brendan. Said, yeah, that's what he's doing. It's learning. You could get rid of the improvement because in order to improve something, you have to learn. This is a cycle for learning. This is how we learn. And it's a methodology organizations can use to change the system, not to deal with the people or the things that are outside the norm. The system is giving you this result. I used to have executives come to me when something bad happened because I had cause and corrective action. You got to help these guys figure out what happened and how to fix it. And I said, well, tell me what happened. He said, yeah. And then he'd look at me almost always. Once in a while, it was a she, very rarely, but once in a while it was a she, and say, the system's broken. And I said, let us do the investigation. Because just because you got this bad result doesn't mean the system's broken. Well, yeah, look, we got that result. I said, your system's perfectly designed to get the results it gets. And that's one of the results. So unless we figure out that it's not a system thing, it's a system thing. Your system, the mental model they have is that their system is sort of like a Formula One racing car. And so when they get results like for a Morris Mini, they think the system's broken. And I used to tell them, you don't have a broken Formula One racer. You have a perfectly functioning Morris Mini. If you don't want that performance, you have to get rid of the Mini and try a different system to get your results. But they're convinced that they have a system that's a Formula One system that's perfect in every way. So if anything goes wrong, somebody screwed up and we got to go get them. Instead of chasing, I did get them away from chasing the root cause. I'm not convinced that I got them away from chasing the root who, though. The root who is really important. We got to have somebody to blame. Trying to read my notes. I'm in between and betwixt because I just had cataract surgery, so I can sort of see up close and not see very well back far. Deming talked about data. A whole bunch of people believe Deming is a data guy. He likes a lot of data. While he has respect for data and uses it, it's limited in a whole bunch of ways. He claims that the most important figures, most important data you need to run any organization is unknown and unknowable and needs to be managed. And then you manage by theory. And he gives an example. What's the cost of one unhappy customer? How could you ever figure that out? What's the payback, return on investment of training people? Well, you can measure what it costs to train them. How do you measure the return on investment? Unknown and unknowable. So why do you keep training people? You don't have any proof. You don't have any data. You've heard the saying, in God we trust, all others bring data. Bring me the data that training works. Well, there's no data. Well, you got this in God we trust, everybody else bring data. No. Training is good. Training is good, but you're operating out of theory. You have a theory that training is good. And until something goes wacky where the training isn't working, you're going to keep using that theory. That's good. We need to operate out of theory. It's not the numbers that matter. Deming said, he who runs this company only by the numbers will soon have neither company nor numbers. He'll be out of business. You have to manage by theory. And that's way different from what we do nowadays. Well, most of us. As I said, Peaker's an example who does some things differently, maybe some others too. And to talk about understanding what the system does and what's outside the system and weird. Deming uses an example from the son of a friend. And Patrick Nolan was 11 years old at the time and was doing some project for school. So he measured the time of a bus arrival for school every day and plotted it. And you can see he's got it plotted across here, and two of the points are way out of whack with the others. And they're way out of whack, and he has an explanation for it. We had a new driver. We had a door closer that was out of order. That simple thing, and Deming probably did poke at executives, an 11-year-old kid did. So an executive ought to be able to handle this concept. It's not tricky. It's very simple. Everything within that system. If you want a different result from that bottom line, you have to change something fundamental in the car or the bus or the route or the driving, whatever you've got, something fundamental. If you've got a new driver problem, then you need to train the new driver so it gets back down into there. If you've got a door out of whack, then you need to figure out how to get the doors maintained so they don't get out of whack. And then that moves it down. So when you have only common cause variation, which the bottom row has, if you don't like the result, you need to change something fundamental in the system. Deming talks about fundamental changes. In fact, one of the synonyms for profound is fundamental. So a system of profound knowledge can say fundamental. This is what we're going to build on. This is the foundation. And when you're looking at changing things, understanding the distinction between what's common to the system and what's special is important. And Deming claims it's most important in the management of people. Because if you got a new driver and he's up there, kicking him in the butt isn't going to help. You got to train him. He's out of whack with whoever was driving before. Well, okay. Well, let's do something about it. No, let's go, give him demerits. No. What we need to do is start understanding the difference and then applying it to managing people would be a huge benefit, and we haven't gotten even close to that. Here's an example of a chart that he has where he's got salesmen who sell product B and the same salesman sell product A, and the executive in charge was thinking of firing one of the salesman number one, as a matter of fact. So Deming just plotted the data and then showed it to the guy. And then it's clear that for product B sales, 1 and 2 are out of whack with the others. And it's clear that salesman 1 is out of whack selling product A. So he's somebody out of the range. The range is pretty much on either side of the group. But Deming didn't decide that meant that salesman needed to be fired. Deming looked at it from the point of view of, okay, he's not doing well. Is the reason he's not doing well have anything to do with what the salesman has control of? And he asked the executive, what is this guy's territory?
Right.
And he told him the territory. And back in those days, that territory didn't have much money floating around. And Deming commented that he could have been the best salesman he had, put on the most shoe leather, walking around, made the most contacts, but the environment he was working in wasn't going to allow him to make money. Not necessarily true, but it's possible. And that's where Deming went. When something goes wrong and it's outside the system, you need to look at it. So you look at it. Just because it's outside the system doesn't mean somebody's responsible. It might mean he doesn't have control over something he needs control over. He doesn't have control over where you assign him. And you assign him to a place that doesn't have much money. Well, that's not so good.
Ice cubes to Eskimos.
There's another one that Deming talked about in understanding systems. So you got to recognize systems are different, and you could understand everything about ice and know nothing about water. They're two different systems. You have to study them separately. Donella Meadows has a great line I love. She wrote the Thinking in Systems, a primer, something like that. It's really good. She contributed a lot to the discipline of systems thinking, but even better, she writes beautifully in a way that people who aren't going to take college classes that are complicated in systems thinking, she writes in a way that a high schooler could read, even an 8th grader could read and easily understand what systems thinking is. And she has a great line where she says, we can't understand systems, we can't control systems, but we can learn to dance with them. And it's about that dance. Well, got to tweak this, got to tweak that. And it continually changes. So the idea that you've got a system is wonderful. And if the system is performing, you might want to make it perform better. That's always a good idea. One of Deming's 14 points was continuous improvement. People misread it though. They thought he was saying continuously improve everything everywhere. What he said was continuously improve the system of production. It's the system you're trying to improve. So if you get some little project you want to do here that's going to make things better, like blades, be sure that better is better for the system. The important thing is improving the system, not the part. Improving the part may destroy the system. On again, off again.
On again.
Now, here's a concept Deming didn't get introduced to till at least 1960 because Taguchi is Japanese and didn't write in English. It wasn't published in English till 1960. But he said it out of the crisis. Something is terribly wrong when a part just inside a specification limit is deemed good and one just outside unacceptable. So that doesn't represent the world. Those two parts are pretty much the same. They're almost identical. So from his perspective, what Taguchi offered was way different. Taguchi said the specifications are irrelevant. What you're looking for is there's a target value. Whatever your specification's about, you got a lower limit and an upper limit, but there's a value you prefer. And that preferred value, Taguchi said, ought to reduce the loss. He talks about loss to society. And what loss is the results downstream because you did what you did. If you're a tire manufacturer, loss is not, it doesn't have to do with what it cost you to make tires. It has to do what it cost everybody else to deal with what you made. Pollution in the air, they throw tires away. Sometimes they go to landfills. Sometimes they fill up with water and breed mosquitoes. They cost somebody has to pay for them. Taguchi's not saying they should be free, but if they cost less, that would be better. If you can still make a profit and charge them less, if they lasted longer, that would be better. So he's looking at what he calls loss to society. Everybody loses because of that. So there's never a zero loss, even when you're on the target value. But the idea is when you're on the target value, that's the minimum loss. As you move away from the target in either direction, the loss goes up. So the blue curve represents the loss function. The lower spec limit and upper spec limit for Taguchi are irrelevant. The question isn't whether you're in or outside of the spec. The question is, are you on the target value? That's a whole different mental model. Target value. And here's what's intriguing about the loss function associated with the way we use specs. If you're below the lower spec limit, it's going to cost you more than if you're above the upper spec limit. But everything in between is not only okay, it's equal. All those parts in between are the same. They will perform the same. Really?
And really, the judge of that is also the receiving process, meaning it's only goodness is determined only by the next process, whether it's acceptable if it's near the upper or lower spectrum. Just in the bigger hammer to make it fit. Whereas in Taguchi's example, it's talking about not just the next process, but society in general.
Yeah, in one of the examples, Mazda, no. Yeah, it was a Mazda transmission one, but the one I'm thinking of is one of the companies, either Ford or GM, took apart. No, that's the transmission, but I was looking at the engineers took apart engines, Toyota engines, measured the hell out of all the parts in the engine. They took apart their engines, measured all the hell out of all the parts. Their conclusion was their parts individually were better. And their conclusion was the Toyota engine performed better. How can that happen? Because the parts have to work together. Doesn't matter how good they are individually. And what the Japanese were doing using Taguchi's loss function is they're figuring out what dimension passed the minimum loss downstream to everybody else. And so they made the parts at those values. And by doing that, improved the performance of the system as a whole. Ford thought they had figured it out and thought it had, and they knew it had something to do with variation. So they tried to improve reduce the variation in their processes, which is okay, but you can reduce the variation in the process. If you don't make it able to fit with the downstream parts, then it's going to be problematic. We had an example of what engineers that understand the Taguchi loss function concept. We had a part that had like 600 holes in it, and they had to be drilled and reamed. And then they were about 1.5 or 2 inches thick. and a post had to be put into them. Liquid oxygen goes down through the post and comes out the other end where there's fuel and it gets ignited. So you want those posts not to leak any of that stuff down around. When you put them in the hole, they had to braze them in place. Brazing is you melt a relatively low melting point metal. Brass is typical, and they mix it with some other things. And they had to get a fillet, a little radius. They put a ring of braze on it, on all 600 posts and holes, and then put it in the oven and get it up to high temperature. Then the braze melts and it drips down that gap between the post and the holes. And they're supposed to get a fillet at the bottom. If the gap's too big, the braze runs all the way through. You don't get any fillets. You get all the braze at the bottom of the furnace. If it's too tight, if you get a fillet, the only fillet you get is the top because it doesn't get down through. And so these engineers asked the braze engineer what they could expect with these 600 holes based on past experience and the way they make posts, what they could expect with what they call first time through. Put it in the oven, cook it, and pull it out. Is it good or not? If it's good, that's first time through. They said, what's your first time through? And they said, 50, 70%. And the guys recognized that was immediately a problem because the time they were expecting to have to build 24 rocket engines a year, and 24 rocket engines a year that required 2 or 3 braze cycles, which I think were $20,000 at the time, was going to cut into their how fast they were going to get things done and how much profit they were going to make. So they recognized the Taguchi loss function. And so they spent some time doing experiments and finding out from the data the shop had for them what hole size they could expect. If they gave them this dimension, what's the variation they're going to get? And the shop's very good at that. They know their variation. They know exactly. And then he asked the people who make the posts, which have to be ground from the outside to the right diameter, what they could do. Then the engineer said, okay, so if we can get the holes drilled this size, this consistently, if we can get these posts where their outside diameter is ground and put it at this value, then the gap between these will be between 2 and 5 millimeters, with 3 millimeters being the target. And so they turned the shop loose at that. And I remember at one point in time, a guy on that first shift had made 8 parts, and we're sitting there, and one of the younger engineers ran to one of the designers and said, I'm having a problem. The first shift made these parts, and instead of making them to our target value, they just made them till they ground them until they were inside the spec limit. Then they stopped. So that's not the target value. And so he said, I can't get them to redo the parts. So Mike Malinzak went down to the shop floor to talk to the guy and said, hey, see these posts you made? Yeah. He says, hey, I got a plate here. Put one of those in the plate. The guy put it in and said, that's nice and tight. And Mike said, yeah, it is. That's the problem. The guy says, problem? He said, yeah, when we put braze alloy here, it won't go in. So these aren't really going to be useful to us. Could you put them back up on the machine and then grind it down to the target value? And the guy said, yeah, sure. So cost his team some extra money, cost him some extra work, but he did it. And we asked him afterwards, well, you told the first guy that came to you, and you gave him one of these things. When Mike came down, you decided to do it. He said, what was that about? I said, Mike has always been fair with us. We wanted to do something nice for Mike. Talk about what happens with people in an organization who treat each other nicely. They get a whole lot of cooperation. If you treat people poorly, you're not going to get much cooperation. And if they're competing with each other, you're sure not going to get cooperation. Why would I help him? I want the award. So here's one Bill Schirkenbach showed. You see the loss function there, and you see the off button or the off curve, and you see the on curve. They were making ingots that had to be a certain weight or certain width, I forget, and whatever measurement they were taking. And they had a device that every time they made one, it adjusted the machine based on the last part they had made. And that gave them this kind of a square distribution, which pretty much guaranteed they never have a part outside the spec limit. When they turned that gadget off, you got this bell-shaped curve, which meant you might have something outside the target, but look at how many parts are on the target value. The loss associated with that square curve is huge compared to the loss associated with being on the target. That's something we have trouble understanding too. If I make an adjustment after every part, they're going to get closer and closer together. No. What Deming calls tamper with a stable system, one that operates within these 3 standard deviations, you make the variation worse. Tampering makes it worse. Now here's something too that I always find intriguing. When we look at this distribution, the thing that draws most folks' attention, they like this narrow distribution. All the parts are almost identical. We're fascinated with things being identical. So I think that's pretty good. So we're happy to have that. Look at all the loss associated with that. What you would like to do is have that on the target value. But the interesting thing about getting to a target value, before you even try, you have to have a process that's stable and predictable. You have to have data over time that says this is the result you're getting. Because if it's not stable, it's not predictable. If it's not predictable, you don't know what it's going to do next. Predictability has to do with management. Management is about prediction. You can't control anything, but you can predict. I can predict at lunchtime here out in the parking lot, it's going to be warm. I can't control that, but I can take actions to deal with it because I can predict it. If I can't predict it, no chance. So you need things predictable before you try to improve them. If you're trying to improve an unpredictable process, you don't know if the change you made is what caused the change in the output or whether it's some other thing. So until you get it predictable, it's not useful. And what we have to learn to do is get the system predictable, then start generating plan, do, study, act cycles for what we might change in this process that would shift that average toward the target. Get it under control, get it so it's predictable, then start plan, do, study, act cycles to move it and see how you can do from there. So there we go. A system of profound knowledge, Deming calls it, a system of profound knowledge. Not the system of profound knowledge. How about that? This is a system of profound knowledge. It's a foundational way to think. It's not the only way to think. We get trapped. Deming was very good about understanding how we end up reacting to things. It's a system. And frankly, if he just stuck around for more than 2 years after he showed this to everybody, it might be different now because he would have come up with another. But this is what it is, and it is extremely valuable. He calls it a lens through which to view the world around you. And he says, when your light bulb goes on and you grasp what this is, you will see things differently, things around you, events, people, their behaviors. You will see things differently. And I can account for applying this to transforming an organization is certainly what he'd like to do. But you got to remember when Deming's talking about transformation, I want you to consider what he means by a transformation. Myron Tribus said what Deming is asking us to do is a mental model move from a flat earth to a spherical earth. That's a transformation. That's a big deal. And there's even a bigger one that I think might have been on Deming's mind when he talks about transformation. He got a PhD in mathematical physics that he finally completed in 1928. If you look at the world of physics, Newton lasted up and into the 1900s easily. And then some suspicions started to take place. So quantum mechanics came around maybe 1919. And so from 1920 to 1925, they were working on a way new view of the world, not deterministic. In Newton's world, if you knew where every atom in the universe was at time and its momentum, which direction and speed it was going, you could run the clock backward and find out where it was 30 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. And if you ran it ahead, you could predict what it's going to be downstream. Newton called the universe a clock, not like a clock, it's a clock. And so he was treating it like this mechanical thing. And everything was deterministic. And then come to find out, Heisenberg came in and found out there's a thing called the uncertainty principle. And that uncertainty principle is really troublesome because it explains a whole bunch of things. We can make predictions very accurately using it. Not that we understand it at all, but the universe is at a fundamental level probabilistic, not deterministic. Talk about a transformation. That's when he was going to school in physics, moving from what he learned in undergraduate, probably about Newton, to what Bohr and Heisenberg were talking about. It's amazing. That's what he's talking about in transformation. And that transformation of your organization can be just as dramatic. So an appreciation for a system, he's not saying you have to be be an expert in systems. He's saying you have to appreciate a system, meaning there are interdependencies and that the result of the system is not caused by any one of those things. That's you don't have to get more into it than that. Understanding variation. You don't have to be the best person in the world. You have to recognize common cause variation, what's part of the system, and special cause variation, what's not, and what to do in either case. If you've got common cause variation, you want an improvement, change the system. If you've got special cause, find the cause, get rid of it so the system is now stable again. Psychology, people are doing the work. So you've got to understand the psychology of the people and the groups and the psychology of change. Then theory of knowledge, that's how do we continue to learn? And what Deming offers is the plan, do, study, act cycle. Those things are interactive. If you understand variation, that's fine, but without understanding the psychology and theory of knowledge and having appreciation for a system, you're missing something. And you can apply those things individually. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that you get more insight by looking for the interactions. And as I said, you don't have to be transforming your organization. Just look around you, read the news, and then say, oh, what system are they talking about? What kind of variation did they have? What do they think they're learning? What's the psychology behind it? How do those things interact? And that's the interactions and interdependencies are key, but also understanding those four things individually. So why are we here? Deming used to say at all his 4-day seminars, to learn, to have fun, and to make a difference. So if I accomplish my purpose, you might have learned something. I hope you had fun. And whether you make a difference or not depends on you a little later. I don't think you're going to make it right now today. let's open it for questions, which sometimes I have answers to.
You said early on that purpose is everything. Can you relate that to profound system of knowledge?
Yeah, a system for Deming, every man-made system has a purpose. If it doesn't have a purpose, it's not a system. Natural systems may not have a purpose. They're natural, but man-made systems have to have a purpose. Without a purpose, what's the system? The car has a purpose. If you're producing the car, what's your purpose?
So you said natural systems may not have.
Can't tell. The one who created those is God. I don't know.
God's purpose. However, isn't the indifference to natural systems part of why some of our systems suffer special causes?
I would offer that if it's a natural system, it's not likely a special cause. If this building gets damaged by a lightning strike up there, immediately people say, well, that's a natural cause. I'd offer it's a design problem. Nobody put up lightning rods. That was a choice. Might have been a good choice because we don't get that many damn thunderstorms around here. So why would you spend the money?
So it's no longer natural, it becomes part of the pieces.
Yes. Everything in order, at least if your business is producing something you're going to sell, you got a product, a thing you make, everything you do is a natural system.
I'm trying to relate this to a larger system. So how do we, for instance, optimize the quality of life on this planet?
It's a good question.
So I have to believe that there are systems in place to do that. And how do we make the effort to bring those that are negatively impacted the quality of life into alignment with what seemed to me to be both natural and enemies? So I'm trying to connect the dots between purpose and systems. And I'm not seeing that as feasible as we declare that natural systems are, outside of the way that we do that until they impact. And I think that.
I think what Deming's saying is I said natural systems may have a purpose, but I don't have any way of figuring out what that purpose is. I have none. There's no way. That's the way it is. And I don't have,
variation in worldviews, because one person might think that they have an idea about the purpose of natural systems, and other people don't.
Or what optimize it. What's the best flavor of ice cream? Chunky fit. Also go to Jonathan's favorite.
there's an interesting thing I discovered years ago. It was fascinating to me because I like logic a lot, but I know that's not the only way to view the world, but logic is very useful. And what I found, not only in myself, but in others, is because we're so strongly want to be rational. When you ask somebody a question when they're standing at 31 flavors at the counter, why did you choose Rocky Road? Just like that, there's an answer. That answer has nothing to do with why Rocky Road came about. It is a rational process. The reason it came to your head is at that moment, that seemed like the right thing. That's it. But we always have an explanation for no matter what we did. We have trouble recognizing most of the decisions we make have nothing to do with logic. They're done. There may be some vague logic in the background, but it's not really logic. We're not as rational as we think we are. But we feel a need to be rational, because if you're not rational, something's wrong with you. So a whole bunch of Edward de Bono with his 6 thinking hats. One of the hats is about emotions. It's about gut feel, hunch, and instinct. Gut feel, hunch, and instinct drives a hell of a lot of what you do. And it's not logic. It is part of our thinking, but it's not logic. And it's okay. It doesn't have to be logic.
Based on your knowledge of them. Difference, making a difference, a positive thing, indifference, a negative thing with regard to continual improvement.
Well, if you're trying to, the thing you ought to be focused on continually improving is whatever system you're dealing with. So if you're talking about an organization or a school or a company, what's its purpose? And how can we best achieve that? How are we doing? How best can we achieve it? Can we do to either change our purpose if that's valuable, or to change the system to achieve this purpose better? One of the things an organization ought to do is not only have a purpose and have everybody that works there understand how he or she fits into that purpose. They ought to continually look to see if our purpose should be changed. Is there something that's gone on around us that we ought to get involved in that we aren't in right now? And that continual examination. What else? Yes.
Question. You said, like, for example, it's hard to manage the football game, the soccer game, when the players have their, like, distinct areas. But what if I'm just like, I understand the general purpose of this, what you're saying, but it's just like, for example, what if you want to help someone? You don't have any funders, but the person has its own ways to do something.
Yes.
And like, maybe you're willing to help, but in the real world, doing good things not always turn out to be the best thing to do for something. And like, for example, in the organization, you made an example for production, production and assembly. And for example, production trying to help the assembly, they're all working all together in one organization. But for example, assembly have their own ways that production is not aware of. And like, maybe their attempt to help to do good actually.
Like the blade manufacturers.
Yeah. So like, is it like all about balance, or like
That's why Deming talks about a system needs to be managed. And if you're trying to manage a system, the great thing about drawing a boundary, and you need to draw a boundary, what system am I talking about? Because frankly, everything is a subsystem. So the universe might even be a subsystem. It started with the Big Bang, and if the Big Bang was 2 things interacting, this is a subsystem. So everything's a subsystem, so you have to draw your boundary. And the great thing about that is you can change that boundary line easily because it's here. You don't have anything physical to do, so you can change it and then react to it. But you need to understand what your boundary is, and you need to understand it'll be influenced from things on the outside. But that understanding of what your system is and what it needs to be doing has to be managed. And part of management is making sure those people know how, when they work, how the stuff they do affects others, and how what others do affects them. They need to understand that. And that's part of what management needs to do. They need to grasp those interactions, and they need to push people to look at those interactions and figure out how they can improve them, because that's the way you're going to get better and better. And it might require some massive changes. Certainly a transformation like Deming's talking about for most organizations is a massive change, but it's recognizing what you've got the ability to manage. And if whatever you're trying to manage is just too cumbersome, narrow the boundary. Then go try to manage it. Deming says the bigger the system you can manage, the more power you have of creating what you need. The smaller the system, the less power, but the easier it is to manage. So somewhere in there, you know, maybe you can't manage the whole engine, so you're going to manage the pistons and be a piston supplier. And by the way, Deming talks about production, but it's not just about production. It doesn't matter whether you're selling goods or services. It's the ideas are all the same. And you could draw that production viewed as a system as a chart for delivering haircuts, for delivering radishes. You can draw your own figure. It's the same kind of figure. It's just not about assembly and manufacturing. That's another mistake some people make. They think Deming's all about manufacturing. No, he's talking about transformation of government, education, and industry. So, and some of industry is production. But a whole bunch of what he's talking about has nothing to do with production. It has to do with managing people and systems and understanding the distinction between common cause and special cause. That's key.
So you said that the lightning were hit this building and we had made a conscious choice not to install a lightning line for them to happen. That lightning became part of the system. But it struck before we knew that it was even feasible, but lightning could strike.
You'd have to be rather ignorant to recognize there's not lightning. Lightning's all over the damn place. How would you not know it?
I'm just wondering, what point does something move from being a special cause, being a inherent cause?
If it's not normal to the system, it will increase the amount of variation in that system. So if you get an amount of variation that's not normal in the system, you have a special cause. The system's infected. And if you want to do something about it, and you should want to, because your system's now unpredictable. You don't know if my mileage has been running 25 to 30 miles to the gallon and it suddenly goes to 22, something's wrong. Something's different. And now the downside of that is I don't know what my gas mileage is going to be next week. I have no idea. It's unpredictable. So in order to manage the system, you want it predictable. Whenever you get something that's outside the predictions you have and the information you have, it's a special cause. It's a signal there might be a special cause. It's a smoke alarm. So it may not be a fire, but you ought to go look. And if you look and you can find the special cause, you can eliminate it. And now you're back into the predictable. Your system's not better. Your system's no better than it ever was. And we think getting rid of special causes improves something. It's not an improvement. You put the thing back where it was. Where it is, if you want to change it, you have to change something fundamental in the system. And importantly, when you're managing your people, you need to recognize when the variation in whatever they're doing, whatever task performance they have, is outside the norm. You probably have enough data to figure out what the norm is. If they're outside it, you need to go find out what might be causing that and take action on it. And either help them get better, or if they're outside on the high end, as I said, see if you can figure out what they're doing and you can teach the others, then they'll be doing that too.
I have a question too. So you said if your car's getting 30 miles per gallon, and all of a sudden you're getting 22, that's a cause to do something. What if you're getting 30 miles per gallon, all of a sudden you're getting 38?
That'd even be a better cause, because now I can get, if I know what that is and I can repeat it, I can always get 38.
Could you make your senses out? But there's a definite problem that requires.
Well, that's That's what you find when you go study. It's a smoke alarm. You don't know if it's a special cause. That's an alert, and so you go look. And if you can find the smoke and you find a fire, and it's fixable. One example I remember that a company had put some stuff in an oven that they're supposed to do and burn the stuff all up the way they'd always performed it. So they went in and were looking at what's going on. They couldn't figure out what caused it. And then I don't know how they got the idea, but they talked to the gas company that was supplying the natural gas to their furnace. And during the time that they put that stuff in the oven, they were getting gas that had much higher energy density than the norm, which meant the amount of heat energy it put into the product was way more, like 50%, 150% of what normally went in, and that's what burned it up. When they discovered that, they had a choice. Okay, we can try to do something to measure the incoming gas and make adjustments. And then they called the gas people back and said, well, how often does this happen? So once every 2 or 3 years. And they said, it's cheaper for us to let once every 2 or 3 years some batch go bad than it is to do anything about this. They did find a special cause and elected not to do anything because cost is involved. So if it was cost effective to do something, they'd do something about it. It's not cost effective. Why would you do that? Because you're crazy.
Yeah, so I think that's a good example. You often look at these systems and say, oh, well, I got more than I wanted, right? My fuel economy went from 30 to 38, right? And so that's a good thing. I'm pleasantly delighted. But if your system, the downstream customers from you, right, are expecting you to get 30 and you suddenly give them 38 widgets, well, now they have to figure out how to store this additional widgets. So this, if you look at it from a gas company's perspective, right? They're supplying more BTUs, they're giving feed energy, their customers should be happy. Oh, no, they weren't. And so it's maybe a comment on this. We've often focused on the negative side, right? And not meeting the expectations, but over meeting the expectations is also a problem. And so you bring in the example of the person who's doing better, right? Who's out the others in the system. How can we train them to use that person's performance to train others in the system? That may not be looked upon.
Yeah. Yeah, or he may be performing, he may have in essence, a special skill that's not trainable. I mean, I see a lot of guys walking tight ropes. You might be able to train me, but I'm going to get hurt a lot. So, yeah.
Yeah.
A question. Take the Ford Pinto as the example. Right?
Yeah.
They model the cost of not redesigning that gas tank. Human life is worth about $3 million a piece. That is an acceptable cost at a certain number of fatalities. It just happens that their model was wrong. The juries decided that human life is worth more. Do security and safety have a special role, have a special asymptotic relationship to cost?
Not necessarily. There was when the gurus were talking about things this would have been the early 70s. They were talking about their concept was that reduction in cost was the thing to do. They didn't recognize the reduction in cost didn't come from attacking cost. It came from attacking the method that's getting you the result. And so the focus was in the wrong place. So if your company focuses on return on investment over quality of life for a whole bunch of people, that's certainly a choice. Deming would suggest that your purpose for being an organization ought to be helpful to the rest of the world. Does it have to be? It's your company. If you don't want it to be, it doesn't have to be. So it's a system problem from the sense that they decided that was their system. And that Deming talks about the decision of what purpose your organization is going to have is a value judgment. What do I value? And if I don't value human life, well, okay, you got a system that allows humans to be harmed, a few at least, maybe many.
And I think the unknown in this was the ramifications of that coming to light to the public. And now this has done way more damage than fixing the damn thing in the first place.
ACOF had an essay about every publicly traded company has two separate sets of customers, the shareholders and the actual people buying the product. And in many cases, the decisions are made more to favor the shareholders. And in the Ford Pinto example, the priority was profitability, which is shareholders' concern, as opposed to safety of the buying public. They're secondary. Thrust of that essay is pretty much the people, middle management that gets caught in the middle. You know, the executive, the C-suite is concerned about the shareholders. People on the floor are concerned about providing a safe product to the consumers. And there's people in the middle management that are getting pulled in both directions. It creates a lot of angst. But this focus on shareholder value without acknowledging other things can cause that kind of behavior.
And what's interesting when you say things like concentrating on shareholder value, there's a value today and there's a value tomorrow. Sears and Roebuck had a value, and what they did created less value for those stockholders later on. So it depends on how far downstream you're looking.
And then shareholder value is usually measured quarter to quarter to quarter anyways, so that drives that short-term thinking behavior as well. And if you look at mission statements of most corporations, first sentence is enhance shareholder value. Somewhere below that say provide medical care, provide automotive, blah, blah, blah. So what they actually do is second or third in terms of their mission statement. And shareholder value always figures prominently very early in the corporation mission statement.
And that reminds me of when we just talked about the idea of how often we see profit listed as a goal or a purpose. And you compare that to three things, right? Like in our capitalist system, if you're not turning a profit, eventually you don't continue to exist. And if it or turn a profit, or if you're in a non-profit system, then you're gathering profit in other methods, right? But somehow or other resources have to pass through. And it's like saying my purpose for living is to breathe in and out so many millions of times, right? Like that is a necessary condition, but it is not my purpose. And profit is like that for companies. It's a necessary condition. It isn't.
What's intriguing about for-profit companies is in the last 20 years, there have been a whole lot of for-profit companies that didn't make any profit for almost a decade. It's kind of amazing they stayed in business.
Different terms here for this kind of conversation.
Different terms.
We talk about, patient safety, human safety, consumer safety, harm to society, harm to human beings, harm to the animals. Isn't a lot of that caused by the indifference of the power to do that harm? So if we translate value into, let's say, something like compassion versus profit, and we translate harm into something more like indifference, suffering, how would that change our conversation about these profound systems? I understand that we're trying to relate all of this to business systems, because that was the perspective from which Deming seemed to approach things off. Not always, that wasn't in my opinion. But I think we're getting tangled up in value meaning profit or power, and suffering, being a loss to society versus the lack of concerned about that suffering, which would be indifference. Right, so what if we started talking about things from the perspective of, is this an indifferent outcome with regard to human suffering or environmental damage or whatever the negative impact on quality of life might be? Versus, is this a compassionate approach to decision making instead of whether or not it's profitable or of value to shareholders?
Well, Deming's looking at organizations that don't necessarily make a profit and saying they're managed the same way. And the difficulty is the management style. They don't have a theory of management. They don't have any idea. They're just doing what's always been done. And as long as that goes on, he thinks things are going to get worse and worse. So they were growing for a while. They grew right after World War II. A whole bunch of things grew rather rapidly because, especially here, because we're the only place in the world that could produce anything. The rest of the world was pretty much in shambles. So dumb luck, you're doing really well. Detroit did really well until the early 70s based on doing everything they'd done before. Then they started getting hit. That's a for-profit company. But if you look at, Deming was mad as hell at business schools, teaching, making people experts in the processes that we had used before that got us where we are now. And he saw where we are now is starting to decline. He's saying, how is teaching them what we did before going to help? And so when you're looking at transforming something or changing purpose, you have to decide, first of all, how big your system is, what your system is, and then what you want to accomplish. Deming says the aim of an organization is a matter of clarification of values, especially on the choice between possible options. So if you got an option that says my shareholders might do better than my customers, that's a choice.
It isn't a slender discussion to work value your ethics and your morals and stuff. It's all kind of rolled together. It's similar to what you're saying. If I look at you and say, are you an ethical company versus an unethical company? It gives me a difference in my perception of you from a performance standpoint. I mean, both companies can make the same product. And if my perception of you is you're an unethical or, immoral company because of how you produce that, whether that's garments in India or in other third world countries where we use, people that are underage versus what we do in the United States, that's something you don't see organizations typically do. Vision, mission, purpose, drive that down to organization, goals, objectives, and then execute to that. But very seldom you see an organization not say, these are the morals, or these are the things that from an ethical standpoint we think are important. We expect leaders to model those, and we expect organizations to model those, but we don't articulate.
Yeah, I'd offer whoever's in charge of an organization, helping them decide who they're going to work with and who they're not going to work with. That's a choice. And you can complain about it, but it's a choice. They can choose to send stuff over and have kids who are probably not very old and probably underfed do the work. They can choose that. And as individuals, you can choose not to do business with them. It's choice is there. You can't do anything about choice.
Versus so
Yeah, conflict guidance, green companies versus other companies. These are all ethical choices, but we don't always have visibility of these understandings.
So let's go back to the Ford example with the Pinto. Roughly at the same time, Tylenol had their little thing, and they pulled everything off the shelf. And that was that improved their reputation just as much as the client of Ford's reputation from the Pinto.
what was that because of sabotage the product in the packaging.
Well, yeah, someone was sabotaging packages in a particular
Yeah.
market that did not have tamper evidence. So Tylenol pulls the entire thing, introduces tamper evidence seals as a thing, and then that gets adopted by the entire pharmaceutical industry.
So, and I think regardless of that, it certainly improved Tylenol's reputation.
Yes.
This all makes sense unless you worked for
They
Johnson.
did become the poster child for,
Yeah.
being a safe product.
I know the backstory.
And, as you were talking, I was thinking about what are the challenges our student here that brought. The challenge is of getting students, let alone businesses, to adopt Boston. Fortunately, I'm now working with a group of this very president fellow looking to business company. Which is a nonprofit, which is about the kinds of things that you all was talking about. They have an equity fund, which just took their first IPO, which is named Studios Program. And a great bunch of people, but they think differently about logically the job with them, why they want. So I've been working very hard to connect their views of what is business, what is an economy, and its purpose, and that then informs why they put their purpose. And they're very intrigued by the Deming philosophy. And I think it connects to the view of economics that is consistent with the postulates of economics of von Mises and Hayek. Because we have destroyed business schools and people by teaching traditional economics, particularly since the 1950s. Teaching them from a Marx perspective that's all about materialism, it's all about scarcity. And markets are revelators of scarcity, and they are remarkable at allocating, usually, but that's not what they are. Fundamentally, they are dynamic social processes of social movement, so that we can begin better. That is the entrepreneurial school of business, and when we think about ontologically, that's the purpose of markets. We bring in model codes to do a firm to help manage transaction costs within that. Fundamentally, what we're talking about are laboratories of social learning from improving contribution. And once we start to understand that that's what the purpose of economies are, and that's the purpose of organizations, we think fundamentally about things like diversity box functions and externalities and so on.
Yeah, there's an interesting thing Deming does. He's always asked, they want him to define quality. And his definition of quality isn't what you would expect, because he talks about knowing whether a process or a product has quality. It has quality if it helps somebody and enjoys a good and sustainable market. Whatever it is. And what Deming is trying to help us with, he is especially concerned with how what we're doing in organizations is negatively affecting everybody within the organization. And it's invisible to us. And you can see it, that the whole concept, if you went to, whether it's a government organization or a school or a not-for-profit company, and you ask them, how important is it to you that all your people take joy in their work? They'd look at you like you're from another planet. What do you mean joy in their work? I'm paying them. What the hell? Work. Yeah, they got a job. What more do they want? And the difficulty is the system we have in place is very resistant, as any system would be, and has been around a very long time. And you can point here and there and everywhere to things that were pretty good. But at all those times when you point here and there and everywhere, the number of things that are not very good for a whole bunch of people is growing. And you can blame companies, but guess what runs companies? Humans. And they have choice. You could try to take the choice away from them, but I'm not sure that's the solution.
Below 50.
So what are their excitement?
What about viewing business systems with regard to whether or not company represents a symbiosis with society versus a company representing the parasite on society? In other words, one that maintains or enhances the quality of life for both entities, society as a whole, and business, or one where the business is destructive for the society, whether it's visible immediately or not. It's going to kill certain elements of society that continue to be profitable and exist in profit, like a cancer. Could we perhaps approach this from Deming's perspective as being a way to translate the difference between a noble purpose for a business system versus destructive purpose?
Yeah, I would say that whoever is going to organize, create an organization is going to have values and ethics. And what those values and ethics are going to influence the organization that gets created. And he can create it in the image of what Deming's talking about, or he can create in somebody else's image. But it's his choice. I don't think he can do a damn thing about it. He can choose to run a company that, and if the government lets him, that pollutes all of Butte, Montana. And they did for a long time.
That influences not only individual decisions or management decisions, governmental laws and regulations to prevent that kind of thing from propagating further. Couldn't we do something?
That's a dangerous proposition, I think. We talk about the high housing prices in the United States right now. And that's as a result of well-intentioned regulation that says we shall make houses as safe as possible. And we start enforcing these building codes. Like if I were to buy a house now, if I do a major remodel on my house, I can't just remodel it in the state that it was in. If I tear apart a door, I have to make a 36-inch door because of ACA requirements. That means I got to tear down an entire wall if I want to do improve. If I want to change the paint. I'm exactly.
Overly generous. So nice white people don't want dark people moving into their neighborhoods. And people who have housing values don't want apartments built in their neighborhoods driving down the cost of the value of their property.
It's all an interconnected system, right? Take low affordable cost housing, right? One of our approaches to that in cities in the past was there's only one bathroom on the floor. There are shared apartments and shared bathrooms. We basically create regulations that make it so you cannot have that kind of construction here in California. You cannot build an apartment building.
And then you want to take care of the homeless population. Some building code says that for every unit, you have to have so many parking spaces. People who are on house don't have cars. So why do you want to put it, so if I want to do the right thing and build affordable housing downtown, for every person I put up, I have to make sure they can have a place to park their car. They don't have a car, it's not necessary, but I can't put that up because there's all kinds of well-intentioned things that drive negative impacts. If you over legislate, like you say, ethical, moral behavior, you probably have unintended consequences that's going to hurt you in the long run. Beware.
Well, there's
It's definitely a system that's beyond our ability to control.
that's the thing you look at. What system do you want to look at? How big is that boundary? The bigger you make it, the more oomph you can have. But the they're the problem of management. If you've got an organization with 7 people, managing that is a lot easier than managing an organization with 7,000 people. There's not much you can do about that, but there are ways to manage that are going to help the people that are working there and the people around. But everything we do is a choice of some sort. And one of the things that we're in danger of, we have a very interesting way of doing stuff. Our science, the world of science started as a categorization. They started categorizing things. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with making categories, but you have to remember the universe doesn't have a damn category. There's not a category for anything. We made up the categories. And the unfortunate thing is when you make up a category, you immediately make up a second category, the thing and the thing it's not. And categories in and of themselves are only useful for counting things. How many things are spoons? How many things are forks? That might be useful, but it doesn't tell you garbage that's useful to changing anything or doing anything productive. And yet we got categories all over the place. And then compounding that is if you can use a category to describe somebody, then you don't have to listen to him anymore. Because he's a communist, or he's a Republican, or he's a Democrat. And as long as we're gonna mess with categories, we're gonna have trouble. I think the categories ought to go away. What do you gain?
Are having the right to decide. And we have laws and regulations that are supposed to allow people to do that. We're very punitive for those that interfere with it. However, does that mean that a serial killer has the right to pursue his happiness, which means indiscriminately killing, his target victim without any repercussions? We put laws in place to try to protect ourselves from that, which is going to infringe on that individual's pursuit of happiness. Where do we draw the lines? I don't know exactly where we draw the lines. Like crazy, but
In the loss country we're talking about, right? So the laws and regulations are intended to probably be at that optimal point for the loss function, and so we create our laws to like try and keep that in balance, and you have all sorts of things that fall outside it, or we don't understand.
There is, and at the optimal position, there is still that incremental loss, right?
yeah.
It's understood that everything has like a consequence, and the idea is to minimize that. That's what the Gucci style is.
Minimize the
So you compromise the liberties of the serial killer in order to protect. So one guy's pissed off, we got a whole bunch of live people, so I think that's a reasonable trade.
It's an extreme example. I mean,
No, extreme examples are good.
But you need to be careful about what you're designing your measurement to be, right? As you're setting out to look and say, well, that's the problem I'm trying to solve, measure. Invariably, you're gonna measure something and you're gonna make an improvement or optimization around that. Hopefully you get to the bottom of the loss function for your thing. And at some point, somebody's gonna say, well, but unhoused people don't have cars, right? And so you were optimizing your build situation to make sure that it was accessible by the car. So you created a measurement that was, a function of that, right? And now you're looking at it from a different perspective and trying to optimize for the maximum number of housing. And I can, if I'm trying to get more roofs over people's heads, one way to get rid of that is to get rid of the parking. And now I'm not so concerned. You made a comment about, these systems are inherently unknowable and unmeasurable, right? At some level, the systems we're dancing with, I like what you said there. We're dancing these systems. They're inherently measurable and unknowable. We can try to design systems to measure this and do this. but we need to understand the impact of those measurements and their.
Yeah, and unfortunately, executives are fascinated with data. And they have they call them metrics, and they have a metric like 15 items they look at every month and make decisions based on what those quote metrics say. And when you ask them, what is that telling you? Why do you need that information? They don't have a clue. They just have data they're looking at. And since they have data, they think they ought to do something with it. And as Deming pointed out, you don't know what data to look at unless you know the purpose. What are you trying to learn? If you don't know the purpose of what you're trying to learn, you have no way of getting the right data. And the question isn't even asked. The interesting thing happened who was the guy? Was it IBM? I can't remember. Yeah. Anyway, he when he took over the company, he ran it on, it was Xerox. When he took over the company, he started running it on 5 metrics, 5 for the whole damn corporation. And 4 of them had nothing to do with finances. The first one, the first year he did it, the first one was customer satisfaction. The second one was worker satisfaction. Then one down at the tag end had something to do with how quickly they could turn things around. So it was sort of had to do with a return on investment, but not exactly. But he had those 5 things. And the second year, he changed them. He put employee satisfaction first and customer satisfaction second, because he said, in the business we're in, if our people aren't happy, then the customers are never going to be satisfied. But there's a guy that ran a big damn company on 5 metrics. You see companies that have much smaller things going on, and they've got 15 metrics. And by the way, a whole bunch of them, if one goes up, the other 3 go up too. So you don't need all 4 of them. We're fascinated with numbers, even though the numbers don't tell us anything.
Oh, sorry. I've been retired 18 months, 3 months, 4 months before I retired. We had gotten up to the point where we had exceeded 25 metrics that we were reviewing weekly, and had a person spending 1 day a week just trying to get the data pulled together. Right? For months, I was asking them, why do we track this? What's this purpose to this? I just kept bugging it, and one day the lead goes, Barry, this is where you get to step out.
They didn't invite you to give them some new knowledge.
I'll make the point about half of those, if one was going up, the rest.
My favorite example is I worked for a railroad at one point. We had 3 metrics. Our company-wide bonuses were measured off of. First one was safety. Okay. We can all recognize that safety is important. The other 2 were volume and velocity. So volume was the number of cars on the system. How much business did we do? How many customers did we serve? And velocity is how quickly did those railroads move through the system? It's pretty easy to look at a railroad and go, the more rail cars you have on the network, the slower they all move. It's just like cars on a highway, right? And so we had these 2 metrics, and every year for 11 years I saw this. Oh, it was a great year. Our volume was so good, but well, we can't give you that bonus because of velocity. Next year, velocity was up, right? Oh, yes, it's not on moving trains, but we have a volume, so we can't give you.
Let me correct the volume problems and velocity.
Because those are the same. They're related.
Yeah, measurement's a big deal too, and that's something that you have to be careful of, because you can be measuring things, and the system you're using to measure it, if you don't pay attention to it has variation and common causes that are creating problems for you. And the idea of understanding common versus special causes when a system has special causes infecting it, you cannot manage it because you have no idea what's going to happen next. None. You can't predict. Management's about prediction. If you can't predict, you can't manage. So when you have these, if your measurement system is goofy, you need to get control of that because you have to be assured, first of all, whatever you're measuring is useful to measure and it has a purpose in having that data. And then you need to make sure that it stays within a predictable way, 3 sigma from the average. Yeah, you get the results. You calibrate this machine, get the same results as you did last week rather than different results. As long as you have a system that's infected by special causes, you cannot manage it and you cannot improve it because the variation is the special causes interact intermittently or constantly and then off and then back on. And as long as that's going on, to test your theory, you're going to come up with a way to test it and look at the results, and you're going to get different results from what you have been getting. Now the question is, did it have anything to do with what you did? You have no idea. All you know is you got a different result after you made a change. Well, you've been getting different results without making any changes. You can't possibly validate that you're making an improvement. So first, you have to get rid of all of the special cause variation. Then you have a chance at improvement. But without that, no chance.
Thank you very much.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I think you can keep going for another hour. But some people want to have a break.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for sharing all your knowledge.
And
Absolutely great.
thank you for not being Brazil
Great.
or the States.
All right, we have a break and a lunch. Please be back at 12:30 for the game that Bill and Ian are going to present. And in the meantime, during lunch, you can use the conversation board, if I say that correctly, Jamie.
Yeah, so one of the purposes of coming together as a forum is not just the official presentation, but all the wonderful conversations that we have. So we wanted to create space for you to be intentional with those conversations. If you have a particular topic that you want to talk about, you'll see there's behind our photographer there, we've got a whiteboard, and you are a great pointer, so thank you very much. We've got the board there, so you just know who you are, what topic you want to talk about, and when you'd like to host that conversation. So do you want to host that over lunch or one of the breaks? So just make note, and that way other people who share your curiosity can meet you for that conversation. So make use of that board.
Maybe it's got a time on it.
Thank you.
That's
Right
that was
on.
the time you were talking. So he's a recording person. Yosh, do you know, like, do you just go end show here and that'll start the recording? That'll start the download for the recording or what?
Yeah, that looks like a recording.
Yeah, well, he stopped that. So that was recording. So I wonder if you hit end show and then it'll say, that's when it does the download.
On Zoom, they have
See, there's end show down there at the bottom too.
on Zoom, they have a thing that when
Yeah, and
when
that's-
I open it says stop recording.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying is I think it's end show. Dave, do we hit end show with the Zoom recording? Sorry? The Zoom recording. We hit pause. You just hit end show, so it download video.
I would just in the session. I tried to ask this question.
Yeah.
I can't get a good answer. We'll have to start the second one. Or
Okay, that's your Zooms right there.
Where'd it go? There we go.
Okay, so we're paused, I think. Yeah, the more.
Here's your complete, Dan. We need these.
No, I
can't-
need them for
it's hard to
distance.
see. Oh, it's hard to see here.
share computer sound, optimize. Offers me a lot of things, not stop recording.
Pause, stop recording, the very first
Oh,
one.
there it is.
And yeah, you go all the way down. There you go.
Then I gotta save
that's,
it, stop recording.